So The Shining has always been one of my favorite Stephen King books. And what's funny is up until a couple of years ago, I didn't know that there was a sequel to it. I had no idea. And I mean, they were written like 33 years apart. The first one was written in 1977, and the sequel, Doctor Sleep, which is what we're going to talk about today, was written in 2013. I had picked up this book a while ago and I had been meaning to read it, and so I finally read it. I should have read it sooner. Returning to that world, after the Overlook had burned to the ground, when it cover your ears if you haven't read The Shining. I already said burn to the ground, so you already know. You haven't read The Shining or seen the movie? Came out in 1977. Sorry for the spoiler. You'd still enjoy it, even if you know it burns down in the end. Anyway, returning to the world of Danny Torrance when he's grown up. You come into the book after The Shining. We're continuing with Dr. Sleep. Danny Torrance and his mom, Wendy, are in this apartment and they're living there. One day, Danny goes to use the bathroom, opens it up, and he sees the lady from room 217 from the Overlook Hotel from The Shining in their apartment bathroom. Like, she followed them. So he shuts the door and he goes and tells his mom, do not go in the bathroom. And that's where we come into in the book. So he's still young at this point in time. She calls up Dick Halloran, who he had basically come back and saved them at the end of The Shining. And he comes and he visits with Danny, and he kind of, he's kind of his mentor in this whole thing with The Shining, because he's the one that knew that Danny had it, and they're able to talk without, opening their mouths. They can talk mind to mind. And so he explains to him how he can overcome these ghosts and basically trap them so that they don't harm him. So he learns how to do this, and he locks these ghosts up tight so that they don't come and bother him. But things don't always stay buried now, do they? And so one thing Dick said to him too, he was like, when the time happens, the teacher finds the apprentice, kind of like how Dick found Danny. He's like, in your life, you may find another person that has this ability that you have. So it may come and find you. And so you have that. And then we fast forward a bit, and later on in his life, now he goes by Dan Torrance as an adult. He basically went the way of his father and has kind of become a raging alcoholic and is a severe addict and just absolutely struggles with it. And he hits rock bottom. Goes home with this woman one night, spends all his money on blow, wakes up next to her, she's all sprawled out, and he gets up and there's cocaine on the table and all that. And then as he's going to leave, there's this little kid that comes out and he's like, Mama? And he's like, ah, F. And the kid looks at the table and he's like, candy. And he's like, oh, no. Cocaine is not candy. So he picks up the cocaine and puts it out of the kid's reach. And then since he spent all his money on blow, he sees the girl that he slept with, her wallet, and goes over there and takes the money out of her wallet. And he looks at the kid, and the kid's got bruises up and down his arm. And it seems like as there's been some abuse there. And then he books it and leaves and never talks to that person again. And so that was a pretty bad and traumatic rock bottom for him. And so he decides to get out of town. It's time. Let's go. He doesn't hold down jobs very well. So he's kind of transient and bounces around. So he's on this bus and he's traveling, and he ends up going to this town called Fraser, New Hampshire. And he kind of hears this voice in his head that's like, this is the place. And then he starts hearing Tony again. And Tony was his friend when he was younger, his imaginary friend, or maybe not so imaginary friend that, this carries over from The Shining. And so he stops in this town. When he gets there, he meets this guy, Billy, and they have this little town in the town called Teeny Town, and there's this small little train that this guy's working on, and they strike up a conversation, and Billy seems to like him, and he's like, yeah, do you have any interest in working? We're looking for someone who will work with us, and it's only going to be part-time, but I got a good feeling about you. And in that, Dan recognizes that he might have what Dick would have referred to as just a little bit of the shine to him. So he goes and he talks to the main guy in town about how getting a job, and Billy had warned him, he's like, also, what's his name, Casey, does not tolerate any kind of drinking. So no drink. He's like, do not mention that at all, da 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 da. And so He goes and he talks to Casey, he gets the job, and then he starts doing that, and things are starting to look up, and he's doing well. And at some point, he isn't drinking for a little bit, but then he ends up going to the store and he gets a bottle, and he's like sitting there and he's opening it and he's closing it and he's opening it and he's closing it. And then I think he sees Billy and he's like, I need help. And so Billy takes him to Casey, and Casey is like a former alcoholic as well, and they have a whole AA program. So basically, this guy kind of saves his life, and Dan starts going to AA, doing the program and getting out of drinking and this, that, and the other. And he makes it several years, and I think it's in like the third year or something. Like, he's writing in his little journal that he has for AA, and he writes down the name Abra. He's like, what does that even mean? Well, a little ways in a town just a bit further off, a baby is born named Abra. And Abra seems to have a whole lot of the shining in her, and she starts reaching out to Dan, like here and there over the years. And once she gets a little older, I think around like 12 or 13, one time he comes back and he sees on his little chalkboard in his room, because he works at a hospice, and they call him Dr. Sleep, because when the time has come for people to pass on, he helps them to pass on. And so he gets this message on his board, and it just says hello, and he's like, hello? And he kind of thinks he knows that it might be Abra that reached out. So he's like, are you Abra? He just kind of says it out loud. He's not sure if anyone hears anything or whatnot. So she has the shining, and she connects with him a little bit. And now there's this crew of people called the True Knot, and they're sort of like vampires, but not quite. They inhale the steam of people, more so children, that have the shining in them, and that gives them life so that they may go on and exist for years. And at some point in time, they start to notice Abra. They travel around and they end up killing this one kid, and she sees it, or sees the flashes of it, and she's like, they're hurting the baseball boy, you know? And she tells her parents this, and I think she reaches out to Dan about this. Eventually, these True Knot vampire people start where they're gonna come after her. She reaches out to Dan because she doesn't know who else to talk to help her. It kind of comes full circle where he is now the teacher, and how's he gonna help her with not coming off like some weird creepy guy, and like if her parents meet him like, hey, you're some creepy like 40, almost 40 something dude that's talking to our daughter who is like 12 or 13. What the F? In the end, like, it all comes back to full circle almost with The Shining. The way it ended is so good. Probably one of the best Stephen King books endings that I've ever read. The story's freaking great. I love the characters. The way it got, you know, pulled back into the original story too, with how it's interwoven, and the end. Oh man, it's so freaking good. I don't know if this is my favorite new Stephen King book. It might be, but I like them as a whole. Like The Shining and Dr. Sleep together. Favorite ever. So good. And you know, like sometimes Stephen King's endings aren't the best. This one was the best. It was so good. I can't stress it enough. If you've read The Shining and you haven't read Dr. Sleep yet, is Danny able to save this girl? Does he have to sacrifice himself? Do his ghosts come back? What the F happens? You gotta read it to find out. And man, what a book. If you're a fan of Stephen King, wow, the next video coming up will be a Stephen King video. So stick around and check it out. And if you had fun hanging out today, hit that subscribe button, come back, see me again, and we'll talk about more bookish things and weird stuff.